Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to use sashing and cornerstones. To demonstrate how to do the sashing and cornerstones, I'm going to use one of our pre-cut kits. It makes log cabin blocks. So here's one of the blocks. Here is what a quilt looks like with no sashing and cornerstones. And here is what it looks like when we add them. So let's get started. To pick a fabric for your sashing, you want to get one that gives you a border or a contrast color all the way around. So I'm going to use this lighter one. This is called Grunge. It's from Moda. You could use dark sashing, but the block is kind of floating in, so I like this a lot better. This will make good cornerstones though. No matter what size your blocks are, your sashing needs to be cut the same size as your blocks. Mine are 10 inches, so I'm cutting my sashing 10 inches. It's going to be about the same size finished as these strips here. You can make it bigger or smaller, that's a matter of preference, but it does need to be exactly the same length. Now these are going to go on the sides also, but again, exactly the same length. Then you need to cut your cornerstones. They're square and they're the same size as your sashing width. The sashing will be easiest to stitch on if you cut them on the width of your fabric. So these were cut like this. If you cut your sashing with the grain going like this, it stretches a little bit and it's hard to keep it accurate. So cut them this way. Before we start cutting, we need to determine how many cornerstones and how many pieces of sashing we need. So I'm a pen and paper kind of person. So I've got 12 blocks. So my cornerstones are going to be at every juncture here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to need 20 cornerstones. To figure out how many sashings we need, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. We need 16 for the uprights. Then across, we're going to need 1, 2, 3 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to need 15 plus 16. We're going to need 31 sashings. I'm sure there's a formula you can use, but I always just sketch it out because then I know I'm doing it correctly. So let's grab our cornerstones and sashing and start sewing. I'm going to show you how to lay out your rows. You want to put your sashing and your blocks, sashing, block, just like your sketch. So this row is just patchwork and sashing. Then you need other rows that are just sashing and cornerstones. So these are the only kind of rows we're going to have in the quilt. In our quilt, we're going to need 4 of these rows and 5 of these rows. So start making your first row. We're just going to sew the block onto the sashing. Since they're both cut on the lengthwise grain, you don't get a lot of play. You just want to match everything up. Stitch right along the edge. I'm going to finger press all of these seams toward the sashing. So I'm holding it open and drawing my finger along that seam. Always use a 1/4 inch seam. Line up your patchwork very nicely there. Again, finger press towards the sashing. Each of these rows starts and ends with sashing. Even though I'm finger pressing this, when I have the row done, I'm going to take it over to the iron and give it a steam pressing so that it's nice and flat. Now we're going to stitch our cornerstone sashing rows. Again, using the same 1/4 inch seam allowance that we used when we put the blocks together with sashing. So careful 1/4 inch seam. So for this row, we need 4 cornerstones and 3 pieces of sashing. Then this row will be exactly the same length as the patchwork row. These seam allowances should be pressed toward the sashing and away from the cornerstone. That way, they're going in the opposite direction from the other rows, and that will make the seam allowances where they meet lay nice and flat. I've got the rows sewn together. So here's how you put the quilt together now. A sashing cornerstone row and a patchwork row. See, they're going to fit right together just like that. Then another sashing cornerstone row, another patchwork row, another cornerstone row. Now all we have to do is sew all these together. I'm going to sew my sashing row with my patchwork row here. Now remember, these seam allowances here are facing towards the sashing. This seam allowance here is facing down, so when I put them together, they're going to be facing opposite ways. That creates less bulk and it makes it really easy for me to match up that intersection. Use a 1/4 inch seam again, and just make sure that all those intersections match very nicely. Now there's several methods you can use to get them to match. So let me show you. Make sure you line this up. You don't want the top layer moving, you don't want that bottom layer moving. Line it up nicely. When you're coming towards this intersection here, so we want these 2 seams to line up. If you have trouble lining them up, you can always put a pin in right here and make sure it's coming out on your seam line there. Then you know they're going to match up. You can also just feel the bulk with your fingers, and you can kind of feel where they're matching up. Same thing here. Intersections all lined up. This is one of the benefits of using cornerstones with your sashing and not using plain old sashing without cornerstones. If I had just a long strip of fabric here, I wouldn't be able to line up my next row exact, and my rows could get uneven. With cornerstones, everything's going to line up. Now I just sew the next row on. Everything will line up. Same method. Match those seams. And we're just going to continue alternating sashing rows with patchwork rows till we have the whole quilt done. Now let's open it up, take a look. I'm always going to open this up and check and make sure my seams are lined up and check for any loose threads here. If you find one of your intersections is not perfect, you can snip out your stitches there and fix it. So we're going to continue on like this until we have the rest of the quilt done. I've got the whole quilt finished here. You can see the sashing cornerstones. It really gives it a nice little pop. Now the sashing, in addition to looking good, when you put these cornerstones with the sashing, it makes it very easy to line up your rows of patchwork. All I added was 1 border afterward. Now you can see the blocks without sashing and cornerstones. These are the exact same log cabin blocks. And this is beautiful, but it's just a different look without that cornerstones and sashing. So get your blocks out, pick out some sashing, pick out a poppy color for the cornerstone, something that really gives it some zip. Thanks for watching. We welcome your comments and your questions, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel.